сейчас мы перемещаемся в нашу студию города Нур-Султан. Стремительное развитие технологий и искусственного интеллекта, внедрение больших данных в науке и бизнесе.
This is all the part of new technological revolution. What is expecting for the future? So right now, the history is the author of Homo Sapiens, A Brief History of Humanity, Yuval Noah HARARI. He will talk about how history impacts on our future. And also, Luc JULIA, Siri creator, will talk, and also the Umut Shayakhmetova and Professor Halyk. We thank our strategic partners, Kazakhstan Strategic University, Kazakhstan Agri-Technical University, Coca-Cola, and Mukhtar Awezov, Kazakhstan University, and also our intellectual partners, Danone and Actively Regional University, and our also Forbes Kazakhstan and Khabar.
Good afternoon and welcome to the last and arguably the most interesting discussion of the third Nobel Fest Central Asia and Caucasus, where we will focus on how technology will shape the future of the humankind. I'm Lyazzat, SHATAYEVA, a journalist based in Kazakhstan, and I am thrilled to present to you a panel of brilliant thinkers today. We're joined by the creator of Siri, a best-selling author, and one of the world's top, most influential digital developers, Dr. Luc JULIA. We also have in our studio here in Nur-Sultan the chairperson of the management board of Kazakhstan's largest bank, Halyk Bank, Umut Shayakhmetova. Shayakhmetova, welcome.
Yes, good evening.
Joining us from the United States, entrepreneur in residence at the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship and a lecturer of the MIT Sloan School of Management, Dr. Paul Cheek. Paul, welcome. With this mighty panel, our next hour promises to be exciting and thought-provoking, to say the least. But before we dive into the discussion, we have a rare and unique opportunity to watch a special video address and a video message by the world's most renowned historian, philosopher, and also author of best-selling books, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, Dr. Yuval Noah HARARI.
Hello, I'm Yuval Noah HARARI, and I'm very happy to be with you today, even if only virtually. The true aim of studying history is not to remember the past, but to liberate ourselves from the past. The past controls us through various stories that ancient people invented and we still believe. Our identity, our society, and our politics are shaped by stories from the past. It's like we are trapped inside the dreams of dead people, and studying history can show us a way out. For example, we think about ourselves as belonging to a certain nation, like Israel or Brazil, and we believe in a certain religion, like Judaism or Christianity. So, when I ask myself, who am I might reply that I'm Israeli, I'm Jewish. Yet, all these nations and religions are fairly recent developments. While humans have been around for more than 2 million years, none of our nations and religions is more than a few thousand years old. Brazilians, no Portuguese, no Chinese. Judaism is only 3,000 years old. Christianity is about 2,000 years old. And even after they appeared, all these religions have undergone repeated changes. The Judaism or Christianity of today are very different from what they were 1,000 years ago. They are not eternal truth, but rather human creations. If you really want to understand who you are, you need to look deeper than these stories. So, history is not about the past, it is about the present. The past is gone. All the people who lived in the past are dead, and we cannot go back there. If history is just the study of the past, it's irrelevant. Who cares about kings who died 1,000 years ago and about wars that ended long before we were born? But if you realize that these kings and wars have shaped the way you live today, they suddenly become important to you. And these kings and wars really have shaped the way you live today, because they created stories that you and the people around you still believe. And these stories determine the laws of society, the structure of the political system, and the dominant religious beliefs. My own personal experience taught me how past stories shape present lives. When I was young, I was often told that gay people are bad because they break the laws of God or the laws of nature. Since I'm gay myself, these beliefs caused me a lot of pain. I felt bad about myself, and I was afraid to tell others about myself or to date other guys and seek love. But by studying history, I realized that these beliefs were not the reality. They were just fictional stories invented by some humans in the past. If two men love one another, how does this harm anyone, and why should this be bad? Even if there is a God, no good God will punish people for love. A good God would surely punish people for violence, for cruelty, for hatred, but he would not punish people for love. As for the laws of nature, you can never break them. If something exists, it is, by definition, natural. If two women love each other, it means that no law of nature prevents it. Things that really break the laws of nature, like airplanes that fly faster than the speed of light, just don't exist. It was only some human priests and politicians who invented the story that homosexuality is bad, and by learning how the story was invented, we can liberate ourselves from it. Similarly, studying history can help people liberate themselves from many other harmful stories. Women are often told that they are inferior to men, but that's not true. It's just a story from the past. For many years, black people were told that they are inferior to white people. This wasn't true. It was just another story. Many people believe that it's okay to kill and exploit animals because animals supposedly have no mind and don't feel anything. But this isn't so. It is a story people invented to excuse their cruelty towards animals. So, the real aim of studying history is to learn the difference between reality and fiction, thereby liberating ourselves from all these ancient stories in order to create a better future. This is something that everyone should do, not just professional historians, because everyone is influenced by the stories from the past.
This was a valuable lesson in history from Dr. Harari. We have moved into the virtual world rather organically with this pandemic, and this virtual forum is a testament to that. And with the pandemic, we have seen a technological boom. Now, some of the world's largest companies, out of the 10 largest companies, 8 are tech companies, and some of them are not even 20 years old. It took 68 years for airline companies to have 50 million users, and it took certain digital services only a few weeks to reach that amount of users only this year. What are some of the breakthrough technologies and trends that we should be aware of? To help answer this question, I'd like to give the floor to our first speaker. Let's hear from a human-machine interaction specialist, co-creator of voice assistant Siri for Apple, the former vice president on innovations at Samsung, and the Chief Scientific Officer at the Renault Group, Dr. Luc JULIA. Dear Luc, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to rebound on what we just said about history, and I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence. And in order to talk about artificial intelligence, I'm going to actually, talk about what doesn't exist, right? So the issue is that artificial intelligence doesn't exist. This is the one that we are talking about for the past, maybe 10 years, the one that I'm going to call the artificial intelligence from Hollywood. This is the one that doesn't exist. This is the one that we might wish, to exist, but the reality is such that it's not there at all. So we shouldn't be afraid of AI. We shouldn't be, talking about AI like, the new God. This is, again, another belief. So, but to talk about it very quick, I'm going to go into the history again, and to say that artificial intelligence was actually invented or discovered or whatever you want in 1956. 1956 is when we started to talk about artificial intelligence, even though, for me, it started way before that. And because I'm French, I'm going to start it in actually 1642. But the reality is that it started way before that, right? So what happened in 1642 is that it was the first calculator, right? It was the Pascaline by the philosopher and mathematician Pascal. And this is really when we started to wanted to have machines doing some intellectual tasks, right? And this is what artificial intelligence, is, after all. It's just a tool. It's just a tool that we're going to use in order to augment our own intelligence. This is what it is. So to do an addition or a subtraction, we're going to use those tools, that are going to allow us to do it much faster. But, if the guys in 1956, they basically didn't succeed, it's because they tried to do something very complicated. They tried to solve what we're going to call natural language, right? So what is natural language? Natural language is basically understanding what I'm doing right now, right? So understanding the words and putting some meaning on top of it. It's a very difficult task. Even today, the Siri and Alexa and other Google Home, they cannot do that. I mean, it's very, very complicated. You cannot have a conversation with them. So they failed, and something else appeared, because the artificial intelligence from the 50s disappeared. What we can call, the statistical artificial intelligence disappeared, and something came up, which was the logical artificial intelligence that we are going to call, expert systems. So this is what we saw, in the 50s, 70s, 90s, 80s, 90s, and we saw something incredible. We saw a machine beating, Kasparov at chess in 1997. It was incredible, right? It was intelligent. Actually, I don't think it was that intelligent, right? I mean, it was a very interesting machine. It was very impressive, but it was only some rules in the game, right? And after all, the machine had, enough memory, had enough power in order to calculate any winning position, from the position it was in. So at the end of the day, it wasn't really intelligent, but it looked like it was intelligent. But anyway, in the mid-90s, something else happened, and the something else was basically the rising again of what we call now machine learning, and that is this artificial intelligence, that is the statistical artificial intelligence. And why did it appear? Is because in the mid-90s, internet came up. And internet came up with a lot of data, right? And the statistical artificial intelligence, the one that we call today machine learning or deep learning, it needs a lot of data. It needs a lot of data in order to be, relevant in terms of statistics. And internet came with a lot of data. One of the lot of data that was on the internet at the time was a lot of images of cats. And because there were a lot of cats, that were labeled as cats, we were able at the time to create the very first recognizer of cats. And it was recognizing cats, at 98% accuracy. And with about 100,000 images of cats, you were able to create such a recognizer. It's incredible. It's intelligent. Actually, maybe it's not that intelligent, right? Because what we need to question is, how many cats do I need, me as a human, to recognize a cat? And we are going to know very, very quickly that if we ask, the psychologists, they're going to tell you that my 2-year-old daughter, she's going to need only 2 cats to recognize cats, all the time. So, of course, what we are saying right now is that those machines that we are creating, this artificial intelligence, has nothing to do with our intelligence, actually. And the techniques that are being used, being the logical techniques, being the statistical techniques, they have nothing to do with our brain. They have nothing to do with our intelligence. Another proof of that is going to be what happened in 2016. 2016, yet there's another machine that came up, and this is the machine that did beat the world champion of Go this time, at the game. And Go is much more complicated than chess, right? So if chess has something like 10 to the power of 49 moves, I mean, Go is going to be between, according to the mathematicians, between 10 to the power of 200 or 10 to the power of 600, which basically we don't know, right? So it means that it's infinite, let's say. It's a lot of moves, right? So we needed to have another techniques than just the logical techniques that we have in expert systems. That was, for playing Go, the machine DeepMind needed to have another kind of algorithm than we used at the time, machine learning and deep learning. But what is interesting is not the methods there, it's to look at the machine itself. When you look at the machine itself, you are going to find out that basically this machine is a lot of computers itself. It's about 1,500, it's about 1,500 CPUs. It's about 300 GPUs, which is a graphical, processing unit. This is another kind of chips. And this is about 30 TPUs, which is a very specific chips that is doing TensorFlow calculation that is good for deep learning. Anyway, so it's a lot of chips. It's about 2,000 machines, right? So 2,000 machines just to play Go. And here, what is interesting is to compare the machine itself that is going to basically need about 440 kilowatts to work, and you need to compare that with the guy in front of it. The guy in front of it, this Korean world champion, who only needs about 20 watts, right? So we have a machine that is using 440 kilowatts just to play Go in front of the guy that is, not only playing Go, but he's talking, he's cooking, he's doing many, many other things with just 20 watts. So what it shows here is that, yet again, the machines have nothing to do with our brain, and the techniques that we are using have nothing to do, with the ones that are being used by the humans, okay? Another thing that we need to be careful when we are creating those machines is to look at the data. As we just saw before, data is historical by definition, right? We have only the data from yesterday. And the data from yesterday, as we also said, just before, I mean, they might be wrong in the world of today. So we need to be very, very careful when we create a system to basically look at the data, because the data is going to be biased. It's going to be biased by history, right? And so there is an example, for instance, in 2016 as well, there was a chatbot that was built by Microsoft, and the chatbot, became the most racist and the most sexist chatbot in the world, just because the data on which it was built were basically wrong. They were basically data from the 50s, and they were data, where the world was more racist and more sexist. So we need to be very, very careful when you choose the data. Because when you are going to know that the data is potentially biased, you are going to want to remove the bias. And when you do that, I mean, you are actually entering your own bias in the thing. And, this is where ethics is going to be very important in the choice of the data that you are going to use for this kind of systems. Because again, the systems are built upon history, and that can be bad for the present time. Another thing that I want to say very quick is that those systems that we are building, we always say, in order to be trusted, those systems, we need to have confidence in them, right? So we need to trust them. And, it's a black box, so you cannot really trust a black box. The reality is that those systems, they are not really black boxes. The systems are going to be built by people who know, right? So it doesn't mean that we all understand it, and we need to make it more transparent in order for more people to understand. But for more people to understand, we need to explain. And education is going to be key in the way we are going basically to present AI to the world. So there are some people who know, and those people who know, they have the responsibility to explain what they are doing in order to create the systems, in order for people to trust the systems. One of the things, that we are talking a lot in the past few years is autonomous driving, autonomous cars, right? And we are saying, yeah, we are going to see autonomous cars, coming, and they are going to be all over the place all the time, and they are going to be much better than us, and so on. And there is something that we call autonomous driving level 5. The level 5 is the ultimate level of autonomy. And we are going to say, that those cars, they are going to be much better than us. The reality is that those cars, they will never exist, right? Because there will always be a case somewhere where us, when we are going to be presented with the case, we are going to be able to react, we are going to be able to invent something. The problem is that those cars, those AI systems, they're always built upon something that already existed before, that they saw before through the data that was presented or through the rules that were presented as well, right? So it means that it has to be something that history existed somehow, right? And you can always have a system that is going to behave in a random fashion, but this is not what you want. The reality is that us human, when we are going to be presented with a case that we never saw before, we are going to be able to handle it. Not maybe the best way, but we are going to be able to handle it, and we are going to react in a way that is going to be, to make sense at the time, it shows up. This is not the case with AI. AI is not intelligent. AI has nothing to do with our intelligence and has nothing to do with the way we are going to react in front of something that is unknown. So, of course, I could talk about Siri and the fact that Siri maybe was a place that, made people think that potentially those systems are intelligent, because Siri looked like human. And this is actually the way we built it. We built Siri in order to show like something that was potentially human, because it looks like, it's going to be a little bit stupid, actually. And the stupidity is actually what made Siri more human than the intelligence. Right? So how was Siri stupid? Siri was stupid because when, you were asking for a question, and a question that she didn't understand very well, she was talking about something else. She was saying a joke, right? And by doing these little things, it made people think that Siri was actually intelligent, where Siri, was not intelligent at all. So at the end of the day, I don't like to talk about artificial intelligence, but I'm going to keep the letters, AI, in order to talk more about the fact that what we are building is augmented intelligence. This is the domain that we are talking about. We are talking about the tools that we are building to augment our intelligence, very much like what Pascal did with the Pascaline and the first calculation machine that we see here. So very much like that. AI is basically just a toolbox with a lot of tools, a lot of very specialized tools that are going to be each of them very good and much better than ourselves. By definition, a tool is better than ourselves. So it means that those tools, we are going to use them in the good way or the wrong way. Like, for instance, a hammer. If I take a hammer, I can use it to drive a nail. It's going to be the right way to use it. But I can also use the hammer, to hit my neighbor on the head. And it's not the right thing to do. But I need to learn about it. I need to be taught how to use this tool. And at the end of the day, all the tools, they are being used by myself, because this is myself who has the handle, right? For the hammer, once again, I do have the handle in my hand. So I have the choice. I decide how to use those tools, and those tools, I need to learn how to use them correctly. But again, we are responsible. We cannot just say, oh, AI is just something, that I don't understand very well, and, it's going to rule the world. No. We are ruling the world. We are deciding how to use those tools. We are deciding how to use our AI. And this is something that we need to keep in mind. We choose the data, we choose the algorithm, we choose everything all the time. There is no black box, and we are responsible in using those AI. So keep that in mind, and this is what I wanted to tell you today.
Luc, thank you so much for your insight. And this was definitely a very positive outlook to how you see the future with AI. AI is coming, and there's no general or global consensus of the desired outcome. What do you see as the most beneficial desired human-machine interaction development in your perspective?
So, as I just said, those tools, we are building them today in order to help us, right? They are going to augment our lives. So when we build being, an HCI, a human-computer interaction tool, or being an artificial intelligence tool, whatever tool we are building them for real people. We want them to be used. We want them to augment the life of those people for whom we are building those tools. So this is what we need to keep in mind. So being, the best possible tool that is going to allow people to talk to each other, on the platform, or being something that is going to help them to go from a point A to a point B for transportation, or being something that is going to be, in the medical field, that is going to help people to be cured for some diseases. This is something that has always the same goal. I mean, making lives better.
Luc, you've just mentioned in your presentation that AI has nothing to do with human intelligence, but with exponentially growing computing power and the data collected at enormous scale. How are these going to affect in sort of analyzing human behavior and essentially actually either decoding human behavior and eventually hacking the human brain and the human mind? Isn't that what AI aiming to do?
Maybe it has this aim. I don't think that it will ever achieve it. I mean, not using the current techniques that are the mathematical techniques that I talked about, right? So using the statistical methods or the logical methods are not going to be, the right approach. The reality is today, if you are talking about people who know more about the brain, right? So let's say that we want to try to imitate the brain. I mean, the reality is that if you ask the experts today, they are going to tell you that they know between 20 and 40% of the brain. So it means that we don't even know what we want to imitate, right? So I mean, it has no reality. Another thing is that by trying to do that with mathematics might not be the right way, right? So maybe one day we will be closer to building machines that are going to be biological machines or physical machines, right? So if we are talking about quantum computing, for instance, quantum is by definition more, physical. So maybe that, those things are closer to our brain, and maybe, it's going to be something that is going to allow us to create machines that are going to be closer to what, we want to imitate. But first of all, we need to understand what we want to imitate. And second of all, I mean, we are very far today with quantum computing. We know very well that it's going to be, a lot of time before they can do something useful. So it's going to take a lot of time. I don't think that the methods that we are talking about are going to be, any close to something that is like the human brain, because again, we don't even understand what it is.
Look, it's interesting that you said it's going to take longer time. According to scientists at the Singularity University, if technology continues to scale at this rate, then it will reach the computing power equivalence of one human brain or one human being by 2023, and of all human beings by 2055. And I'm assuming you don't agree with the forecast. Where do you stand on this? When do you think singularity is going to be achieved? And singularity is a point in time for our viewers where the computing or the technology essentially becomes more intelligent than human beings.
Okay, so definitely not. So again, I mean, not the technology that we're talking about. So not with the methods that we're talking about, as I just said. So mathematics won't be able, to reach anything there. But I mean, singularity is yet another dream. The reality is that we were supposed to have, flying cars about 20 years ago, right? So we are still waiting. So I mean, the forecasts. I mean, yes, sure. I mean, we can talk about it, but I don't really believe in them. But let's talk about specifically, that. I mean, when we talk about reaching something that is going to be like human brain or like, our intelligence or our collective intelligence, the reality is that there is, when you look at the curves, and it was true, for the Moore law as well. I mean, Moore law, we are saying, yeah, we are doubling every year or whatever. I mean, the reality is that at one point, the curve comes back to an asymptote that is going to just, reach a limit. And the reality today, if you look at some systems that are natural language systems, that are done, for instance, by OpenAI, I mean, OpenAI today is saying clearly that, it's very, very complicated now to add more parameters. And it's not about just adding more parameters that you are going to reach a better natural language system, right? So we are something at 150 billion parameters today in the system, in GPT-3, which is the OpenAI system, right? 150 billion parameters. It's a lot of parameters. And it is being, proven right now that adding parameters is not going actually to add a lot of the accuracy. So, you have this limit that we are reaching, and at one point, it doesn't matter to add more. I mean, you need to add better.
Luc, how often do you use Siri?
Using, I mean, pretty much every day, but I mean, for very specific tasks, right? So, I mean, the reality is that Siri, when we thought about it, it was back in the 90s. I mean, when we thought about it, it was supposed to be the omnipotent assistant, you know, that would be everywhere with you all the time. This is your little, you know, cricket on the shoulder, right? I mean, the reality is that we found out that people are finding their very specific niche way to use it, and they keep, you know, using it in this way. They don't use it in this, you know, omnipotent way because it's not intelligent enough.
Thank you, Luc, and we will come back to you. I'd like to come back to our studio in Nur-Sultan just for now. And here I have one of the very few top female CEOs who's helping to break the glass ceiling for the rest of us, the CEO of Halyk Bank, Umut Shayakhmetova. Umut, welcome once again.
Yes, hello.
Well, the more technology we have, the more and the faster we create technology, and this is called a positive technology loop. And the more computing power we have, the more everything gets digitized. And we're already seeing ubiquitous digitization in all sectors of our economies and societies. How do you see that affecting Kazakhstan precisely?
My view is that Kazakhstan is one of the most today developed in the region, a country which is doing a lot upon digitalization of the services. And why we are so successful, for example, around 80% of all the state services today are provided online, and half of them are digital, which means that you even don't come to the office, to the state office or to the state agency, and you don't have to be physically present. So you can open the online platforms through just touch. I think that there are several success stories in terms of the three big parts. One is the role of the government. The second role is the business. And the third role is the client or consumer. If we talk about the government, then we see that Kazakhstan is doing a lot of positive things in terms of the regulation and legislation. It's very friendly for development of IT services. It's very friendly for IT investments, and it's quite easy today to get the access to the state data, lakes for the providing services by the business. The second part, as I said, it's a business role, which means that the companies and startups are ready to start this kind of services. And there are human capital, there are IT specialists, there are ideas, there are capital investments into the provision of this kind of IT services. And we see that Kazakhstan was really successful, especially during these COVID times, which also was a boost for some companies which were starting to prepare for the digitalization before the COVID. And during these last 2-3 years, we see the huge boost in terms of the services, online payments, and we see that the clients, for example, of the bank, they don't come today for services which they were getting before. And digitalization in the business is not only about automation. It's more about changing the business processes to build it more for the client orientation, client-centric services. So today we see that our clients are not in the need of only financial services. And what we see that banks are moving into FinTech, which means that we are providing not only financial services, but also the lifestyle services. If you open applications of several big banks in Kazakhstan, you will see that there are also travel application, there is a market application, there is a Keynote KZ application, so other services which you can just get from one super app. And again, as I said, that it's very important that the state and the business are talking on the same language, are having this infrastructure which was developed in the country, and it's quite accessible internet. Today we have more than 97% of G3, G4 services which are available to the population in Kazakhstan. So you can go easily on internet in rural areas and get online services. And the third part is the population, our customers, our clients. And as I said, it's more of a client-centric approach today. And clients are also very quickly very quickly studying, and they're becoming more and more requesting, more and more, I would say, spoiled by the services which we today have a very high competition, very stiff competition on the market, which is very good. Finally, it's very good for the consumers. They get good services. And consumers, it's not only the physical individuals, it's also business. So there are provisions of different services, business to business, business to customer, customer to business. So it's the whole approach. And Mr. Luc was just right now telling us about the artificial intelligence, and that the important part is also the cybersecurity, the security of the data, the right use of this data, that the personal life and personal space is safe for the clients. And this is, I think, today is one of the biggest challenges, not only for Kazakhstan, but for the whole planet, to keep this data safe, and that the data is not used in the wrong way. Mm-hmm. So I also actually use quite often Siri services in my iPhone. And sometimes I'm even afraid. It looks like it's listening to me all the time, because when I open then the application, it just suddenly comes with some marketing or with some advertising. So definitely it's your huge development and your huge achievement. And I'm really amazed.
Luc, is it listening to us? Is Siri listening to us? Tell us the truth.
So the truth is that it's not. Okay, so we need to be careful. Just imagine, I mean, we need to think about that in a way that is the logical way, right? So if it had to listen and record everything that people are saying all the time, I mean, there are about 300 million users of Siri today, right? So there won't be enough space, physical space, to record all that. You know, it's listening to one thing. It's listening for the word Siri, you know, locally. And then, you know, it's processing what's coming after that for a little while, and it's recognizing that. It's sending that to the servers. Yes, that's true. You know, and it's being recognized and sending back the result. But the reality is that it's not listening to you all the time. And it's the same thing for Alexa. It's the same thing for Google Home. They are not listening to you all the time for all what you are saying. They are listening only for what we call the wake word, that is going to make them, you know, listening to the following part of the sentence.
Well, thank you, Luc. I'll sleep better tonight knowing Siri is not listening to me.
Well, it's very cool that I just get the answer from the developer of the Siri directly.
Well, Umut, you've just mentioned that the client expectations are growing. How do you ensure innovation happens in the bank? And you had the largest bank in Kazakhstan with affiliate offices and banks in 5 more countries. So how do you enforce innovation, sort of not to only respond to market, but also come up with newer and better solutions?
Well, first of all, of course, we see what is happening in the market. As I said, there is a stiff competition. We see also global developments, and you're absolutely right. It's not only that we are following, because if you only follow, then you will not be able to really catch up, because today the technologies are changing so fast that even, I know, one day of being late on some releases really makes you lose a certain market competition. Yes, it takes us to have a big number of people. It's like IT people, it's a marketing people, it's a business people. And as I said, that digitalization and technology is not only the automation, It's also about the processes. It's about the understanding the behavior of the client and trying just to get the good understanding the needs of our clients. As I said, it's not only physical individuals, it's also legal entities, and trying to be one step ahead try to understand what would be the next need of your client and try to already answer this this need just ahead of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Well,
we also ask consultants some client.
Mm-hmm. Because you're heading the bank during such a big transformation and digitization process, you also see how human capital or the need for human capital is changing, right? And I'm sure you noticed that there's a great gap between men and women in the tech industry or in the tech jobs. How do we sort of encourage more women in STEM-related jobs and STEM-related professions?
Yes, you're right that maybe today we see the situation that there are more men who have engineering education or engineering and IT experience and competences. But what is very promising for me, and what I see the tendency today in Kazakhstan, that we see more and more absolutely young ladies, young girls who are studying IT, who are studying math, and especially in Kazakhstan, we have very strong math education in the high school, and they're also very interested in this area. Maybe in some cases it's more like IT or digital marketing, it's more digital business analysis, it's a data analysis, which is also very important today, it's a digital risk analysis. So there are different ways or different departments in our bank, and I see that the number of girls and number of employees in our bank of women is growing. So I'm not really worried about it, and I know that women in general are very strong, and they have this drive to be on the same level as a man, as just Mr. Harari just told us in the beginning, that maybe there are some stereotypes, but we have to not listen to these stereotypes, and we have to just listen to our personal drive, and just there are no limits, no borders for the girls. Definitely be engineer, being IT person, or whoever she wants.
Well, this is definitely an inspiring message from Umut Shayakhmetova. Paul, sorry for keeping you waiting for this long. I'd like to hear from you now. Thank you for joining. Paul is joining us from the United States, and Paul Cheek is the professor at the MIT Sloan School of Management, also an entrepreneur. Paul, I'd like to talk to you about technology and regulation. And I'm sure as a developer or coming from the tech industry, and lots of innovators argue that rigorous regulation kills innovation. Where do you stand on that? How does regulation follow innovation? And what should precede?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. And, you know, any engineer is going to want to go build the future, much like we've talked about, right? And we don't want to be stifled by regulation, right? We want to go, we want to start building. But ultimately, it's once we go beyond just building and commercializing, right? If we think about innovation, it's not just the invention and the engineering, it's the commercialization. It's once we go begin commercializing it, that's where I see regulation really, really starting to take a closer look at what's being built. Once we go commercialize, once we drop it into any region, that's where, you know, government, their regulations need to take that closer eye. And, you know, I don't want to ever, you know, stifle innovation because of regulation. I want regulation to ensure, you know, that everybody's doing things within the bounds, within the guardrails with which we should. But ultimately, you know, if any engineer sat down and said, oh my gosh, I'm not going to go explore or be curious or try to build this thing, then we would never challenge regulation. Regulation needs to be challenged sometimes. Not always, definitely not always. Regulation is there for very good reason. But we must challenge that regulation. And that's really where, when we think about entrepreneurship, we think about that innovation and the commercialization. But we also think about, how can we get curious? How can we inspire others, right? And when we think about making lives better, right, we need to think about how do we push the bounds of regulation? That is an absolute requirement. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I see that progressing, is continuing to push the bounds. That's the key here.
Paul, the reason why I ask is only a handful of companies and services, and most of them are concentrated in the United States, sort of make up the technological forces that affect our daily lives. They make up the majority of the technologies that we use, the majority of services that we use. So that means only a handful of people make decisions regarding what we see, what we consume, how we behave. What is the potential threat there? What is the potential risk there?
Yeah, I would actually think of it as the other way around. Right now, especially, I feel like we're at a point in time where so many people around the world are empowered to, whether it's design a new technology or think about business a different way, where they can actually influence how that changes. But ultimately, I think you're right. It's still going to be limited to some subset of the global population, right? And there is a threat there. But again, you come back to that regulation question, and it's like, oh no, there's people looking out to make sure that that threat is not too strong. That is why that regulation is there. Now, but again, I want to come back to the fact that anybody can go online, can take a course, can upskill and figure out what can we do to change the world to make life better. For a small group of the population or for a very, very large group of the population. And that would be kind of my call out to everybody here today, is what can you go do to upskill, to change the way that others live their daily lives, to make others' daily lives better. And it's very simple. You can start with something as time-consuming as just an interview and going and talking to somebody sitting next to you and asking them about their daily problems. We need to identify what problems groups of people have so that we can then go drop in some solution, some way to make their life better. And Luke, that goes back to what you were talking about. It's not necessarily about all these other factors in the technology. It's about the people going and dropping in these entrepreneurial minds, leveraging their entrepreneurial skill sets to go make lives better. And we believe that, there's going to be a need for more and more and more entrepreneurs. We need more entrepreneurs because the world is never going to move as slowly as it is now. Life is only going to go faster. Innovation is only going to pick up speed, right? And so we need more entrepreneurs like everybody here to go and change the world for the better, make it better, and use those skills that you develop and the people around you to make that all happen. It's all about the community.
Well, if technology is meant to make our lives better, and once it was viewed as the greatest equalizer, but we've seen it can be the greatest divide. We've seen that during the pandemic especially, but the more advanced the technologies are, the more concentrated they are to only a few places actually in the world. How do we then address the growing inequality?
Yeah,
I don't know, this is a big question.
Yeah, huge question, right? But it's all about developing these ecosystems where entrepreneurship can flourish, where entrepreneurs can flourish, right? It's about empowering individuals. We talk a lot about startups and startups being concentrated in certain locations, right? To your question. But it's not necessarily about startups. The way that we think about this is not just about startups. It is actually about entrepreneurs, the individuals who could be anywhere in the world. And part of our mission at the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship at MIT around entrepreneurship is empowering individuals as entrepreneurs, not just the startups that we see come through our doors. While yes, we service our students and help them build their businesses, what we are really doing is training entrepreneurs. And we see within our ecosystem a lot of different ways that can be disseminated around the world to individuals, maybe outside of the major hubs that you've identified. We see, our content going into all different places all over the world to train the next generation of innovation-driven entrepreneurs. And that's part of our goal, like I mentioned. But we also see people going in, bringing their entrepreneurial mindset and their skill set that they develop here in Cambridge at MIT and bringing it back to the rest of the world. That might be developing markets, that might be very developed markets, it doesn't matter. But it's about dropping that skill set in wherever in the world they might be going. And then not just dropping it in for the sake of building a startup, but in terms of building more entrepreneurs. So we always try to train individuals to not just go build the next big thing that's going to make the life better, but to also train those around them. And that's why I reference the community and the people around you. If we can upskill them, set their mindset towards going and building a new startup, that's going to essentially work to avoid that divide that you referenced.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I think we're sort of coming close to the finale of our discussion. And I'd like to have sort of a larger existential question for all of our speakers. And we'll start with you, Luc. What is the story of our future with technology and AI? Is it exciting or is it unsettling for you?
It's definitely exciting. I mean, of course, you know, I mean, this is why we are in this on Earth for, right? I mean, this is to bring more and more and more exciting. So, of course, this is exciting. We need to be careful, though, you know, about the fact that some people might be left on the side, and we need to be sure that when we build something, we are going to build it, you know, for the most people possible. But of course, it's exciting.
Thank you, Luc. Umut, how do you see the future with technology and technology affecting the humankind?
Well, I also think it's very exciting and also very positive. I always think positive, and I think that there are new ways of development, new ways of answering the needs of our clients, of any other human being. And it's just there are no limits. We just recently see this tendency of flying to this space and taking movies there. As you just know, the Russian actress flew to the space for the film shooting. So there are no limits, and I don't know, maybe even I will fly one day to the space, because it was my kid's dream. And I thought it will never happen, but who knows? Yes, I think very exciting.
That's wonderful. Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the word I would use is I am thrilled. I cannot wait to see what the world looks like. I really can't. And I can't wait to see who's creating that future. I'm going to come back to people again here. I cannot wait to see the individuals who make this all happen. That is what really gets me going. You know, I think back to some of the events that we've run through the pandemic, the fact that we are able to join remotely here now today, and the number of people from countless countries around the world that we saw engage in things like hackathons over the course of the past 2 years, it blows my mind. And I cannot wait to see what all of these individuals come together to build, to shape this future that you refer to. So thrilled is the word that I would use.
Thank you so much. Well, we have a brilliant panel, and because it's a very interesting discussion, some of our viewers would like to ask their questions. And thank you for the speakers. If we can take a few more of your minutes of your time. We have a live audience here in Astana, in Nur Sultan. So we'll take some of the questions from the audience. But just before, I have a question from an online viewer. And this is, I'm assuming, to Luc, but also to Paul. Can artificial intelligence replace traditional teachers and help us solve the problems with the staffing in schools?
Okay, so since you know, Paul is a teacher, I'm going to say first of all, no. So it can be, you know, it can be safe. AI is not going to replace us, the human beings, what we are the best at, you know, anytime soon. So teachers are, you know, what is interesting in teachers is that they are, you know, very broad in terms of knowledge, right? So they can do, they have to do psychology with the students, you know, they have to do a lot of different things that just knowing the subject is, right? So I mean, just that is a very, very difficult skill that is very, very difficult, that is actually impossible for an AI to get. You know, everything that is going to be at the empathy level, basically, is not going to be teachable to an AI.
Well, what do you think?
Well, Luke, I'm glad to hear you say that. I think otherwise I'd be in a little bit of trouble here. No, but in all seriousness, I must agree. You know, I don't think that artificial intelligence will ever truly replace a teacher. I believe that, you know, knowledge and the way that it's disseminated is something that it requires that kind of thinking on your feet necessity. And you know, I see hundreds of students every single semester in my classes, and you know, the questions they ask are not something that artificial intelligence is going to be able to respond to necessarily. And the facilitation of that discussion that is really changing every single second, right? I don't see that going away. But what I do see is the ability to make the job of a teacher easier, to focus on the things that truly matter in individuals' development, in their education. And it's funny, last fall, you know, one of my student teams, they got up at the end of the semester and they put up their final presentation. And we always ask them to show a picture of their persona, their target customer. And sure enough, they put a picture of me. And they said that they had AI that was going to replace me. And well, you know, I haven't seen them do that yet. I'm holding my breath. You know, I'd love to see them come up with it. But at the end of the day, what I truly envision is simply augmenting or complementing the skills with which a teacher uses to make them more efficient.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you. We have a few more questions from our audience. I'll pass the microphone to them.
I have one question. Will technologies help us to close the gap between developed and less developed countries? Less.
I think we've covered some of it, but Paul, I think you may have started answering, and I'm sure Luca and Umut can weigh in. How can we close the gap between the developed world and the developing world? So how do we sort of narrow the inequalities through technology?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and Luke, I'd be glad to pass it to you afterwards. But you know, from my perspective, it's taking what already works, right? There's a lot of failure, and Luke, you mentioned this in your talk. Is there's a lot of failure. There's things that don't work, right? And you can think of you know, some of the more developed world as a test bed. You know, let's figure out what works. But I think the real necessity here is to take the things that do work and bring them everywhere else, drop them in everywhere else. However, I do believe that every market has unique needs. And I think that some of the needs in a developed market versus a market that's not quite as developed, they're different. And so I think going back to it, you know, there's a need to empower those in a less developed market to figure out what are the problems that their market faces, and to help them figure out, okay, well, how do we go solve these problems and make life better there? Because the problems are not the same. And we talk about how everything must be connected. Who is the end user of a product, right? We need that to match up with a value proposition that's going to fit to their problem. And that solution needs to solve that value prop. These are all very unique to who that user is within that market. So I think, you know, it's not just thinking about developed versus undeveloped. It's thinking about what can we do to solve the problems in any given market.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, this is not only the needs, but the means, right? So, I mean, it's going to depend. The nice thing about, you know, when you have, when you think about undeveloped countries, you always think that they have less means. But the reality is that, you know, when you have less means, you are going to be more innovator actually. You know, it's going to be, the innovation is going to be higher. It's going to be even more exciting. And so I think that today, you know, by targeting some of the technologies because of the lack of means sometimes is going to allow us to innovate more and to do something even more interesting for the countries that are, or the places that have, you know, less means.
Thank you, Luke. We have another question. Umut, this is for you. What do you think are the prospects for the development of fintech technologies in the banking sector in the near future?
Well, I think it's already quite common question. And we see that the banking will not stay as a classical bank. The banking industry definitely is changing. And as we said, it's going to be more like FinTech. It's a lifestyle services. It's not only like financing, payments, services, which are very classical for banks, but it's more about servicing the other needs of the clients. So it's a super application, in my view, which includes everything like travel, leisure, tours, medicine, even telemedicine. So we see more and more new services coming into the banking. It's definitely logistics. If you go for the marketplace developments and then financing of these goods on the marketplace. So classical banking is going to be not a bad word of dying, but definitely changing into more advanced FinTech services.
Thank you. We have one more question from the audience.
What is one of piece of advice can you give for students of university?
Okay, a piece of advice for university students from every one of our speakers. Luc, please.
Okay, so I mean, a piece of advice, I mean, do whatever you want to do. I mean, and take, you know, the words that Paul already talked about. I mean, be an entrepreneur, whatever that means also, you know, I mean, you can be an entrepreneur at your own level. Doesn't mean that you are going to create the next Facebook. I mean, this is not what it means. It means that you are going to help some people. You are going to do something for some people, and maybe at the end of the day, just for yourself. But just that is going to be incredible. So look at that. And then, you know, if you want to do AI, which is, you know, my field, I mean, just be good at math. This is what matters today.
Thank you. Thank you. Umut, from you?
Well, I think take all opportunities which you have right now during your student years and always study, not only in the student years, but also beyond that. I even today have a lot of studying on new subjects, and it takes a lot of efforts sometimes, but always study and take any opportunity which life gives you. Don't live by stereotypes.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up here. You know, I think from my perspective, I absolutely want everybody to go be an entrepreneur in their own way, 100%. But the thing that I'll kind of add on here is I want everybody to find something that you're truly passionate about. And the reason I say that is because any entrepreneurial journey has some highs and has some lows, some things that go just wonderful and you know, you're super excited. And then some things that, oh my gosh, like everything's going horribly. What do we do next, right? It's really difficult. The highs and the lows, it makes it a difficult journey to go on. But if you find something that you're truly passionate about, that is what makes it all worth it. And you must recognize that, you know, regardless of whether you're creating the next Facebook or not, this is a journey that's going to last, you know, we say for a startup, 7 to 10 years, but truly it lasts a lifetime. So if you find something that you are truly passionate about, it will allow for you to tolerate and actually enjoy those highs and the lows throughout your lifetime. So my thing is find something that you're really, really passionate about and go experiment.
Well, thank you. Umut, Paul, Luc, thank you very much for a truly inspiring discussion. And with this, we end the second day of the Nobel Fest Central Asia and Caucasus. Make sure to join us tomorrow for more interesting conversations.